Welcome to the Leadership Sparq podcast, where we equip you to be the great leader your people deserve. I'm your host, Corey Towe. I'm here with my co-host, the one and only Hampton Dortch. And today we're going to talk about a topic that I know is on every leader's mind because it can be very difficult. We're going to talk about how to approach having a tough conversation. So Hampton, why in the world should we as leaders want to engage in tough conversations?
Tough conversations is one of the units that we provide at Wild Sparq, a 3-month unit focused around that. And it's very popular as we get to talk with executives and HR leaders. This is typically one that when we're going through our content menu, no one's ever like, oh, we're good. We've got that. It's pretty much that's pretty good. And I think it's because they're tough. Tough conversations are called tough conversations for a reason. One of the things that we talk about at Wild Sparq is what are the pillars of an extraordinary team? Personally, maybe my favorite pillar is that extraordinary teams pursue healthy conflict. They go the last 10% in conversations that they're having. They don't leave anything on the table. There's no meetings after the meeting. And that doesn't happen without relationships being built, without a lot of trust being formed. So there's so much that goes into having tough conversations, but no one can disagree that if neglected, bad things don't eventually happen. I think if we wait for a really long period of time, that can lead to a whole lot of bad things happening. So I'll start with that.
Yeah. I've seen so many teams, I'll use the word derailed, because they weren't willing to engage in the tough conversations, and they just festered over time where it created division on the team. And so we don't want that to happen on any of your teams out there. So what we want to do is we want to equip you with what we call at Wild Sparq the 4 whats. These are 4 questions to ask whenever you are thinking about approaching and preparing to approach a tough conversation. And so we're going to give you 4 questions to ask that will just help equip you that the next time you have to enter into a tough conversation, that you feel more equipped because you are going through a framework that will allow you to get your head wrapped around what it is you want to communicate it, why you're communicating it, and what outcome you want to get. And so here we are, the 4 whats. The first what is to ask yourself the question, what happened? And this is a personal question. It's me asking the question, what triggered me? What was it that happened? What did I experience that caused me to feel the way that I felt, or to experience something that I experienced that created some level of conflict that maybe I need to have a conversation with someone else about? So it's more introspective for me to say, what happened? And when I answer this question, what it does, it helps me do 2 things. It helps me get personal clarity on what it was that triggered me to feel the way that I feel. And it actually removes some of the edge of the emotion that I feel if I can ask myself what happened and write it down. That really helps me. So the first what that you can ask is what happened. The second one is what's at stake. What's at stake both externally, what's at stake internally if I do have this conversation, if I don't have this conversation. And externally, it could be if I don't have this conversation, then my team could be toxic. Or if I don't have this conversation, we could actually lose revenue as a company. If I don't have this conversation, then these 2 people on my team are not going to get along, and it's going to slow down the results that I have as a leader and the team that I'm responsible for. Internally will be, what's at stake if I don't have this conversation? I may internally be bitter, or I may be experiencing this emotion every time I see this person because we're not dealing with conflict that hasn't been resolved yet. And so you want to ask yourself, what's at stake if I do have the conversation? What's at stake if I don't have the conversation? So number 1, what's happened? Number 2, what's at stake? Number 3, what's my purpose? Getting clarity on what's motivating me to have this conversation. What is my desired outcome? What do I want to be the result of this tough conversation I'm going to enter into? Maybe it's to understand another person's perspective. Maybe it's to express to someone else how I felt in a given situation so they understand my view. Or maybe it's for us to solution together around the problem. But I want to be very clear on what's my purpose. And the 4th one is what's next. And this is really writing down what are the practical next steps that I want us to take as a result of this tough conversation. Write those things down. What do you want to communicate? What do you want the outcome to be? What do you want the next action step to be whenever you're entering into a tough conversation? So if you ask yourself these four whats, what happened, what's at stake, what's my purpose, what's next, it's going to position you to be better prepared to have a tough conversation that you're entering into. And so the go and do today is to go and do that. Go and do that. Go and ask yourself those four questions to prepare yourself for your next tough conversation.
So yesterday we talked about the four what's, this framework to go through when you are preparing for a tough conversation. And today we will continue our conversation about tough conversations by just going through a couple of more ways to even think about approaching them.
Yeah, just a couple of things that have helped me as I think about tough conversations. One is a lot of times tough or hard conversations are hard because we don't have the conversation when it's not as hard. So we delay, we delay, we delay. It could be days, it could be weeks, it could be months from the actual occurrence that offended me or caused me to feel a certain way. And so I don't have the conversation whenever it's fresh, and it just gets harder over time. And so a lot of times the conversation is tough because we didn't have the conversation when it was easier to have. And so the advice there is try to have the conversation, the tough conversation, in as close proximity to the event as possible, and to keep short accounts. And that'll make the conversation less hard. It doesn't mean that the conversation won't be hard depending on what happened. But if you wait days and weeks and months and months and months, then that's going to be a much, much harder conversation. So don't wait. Try to have the conversation in as close proximity to the event as possible. So that's one. The second one is this, and I've kind of come across this a lot, is that I can assume often whenever I have to have a tough conversation that the other person knows they did something to offend me. And that's not always true. The other person may have said something to me in a meeting or on a Zoom call or passing in a hallway, or something happened in a project that we were working on, or something, an initiative we were working on together, or whatever it is. Something happened that offended me or made me feel a certain way that would require me to engage in a tough conversation. I've gotten myself into trouble whenever I've assumed that they know. And I've been reminded of that because whenever I will engage in the tough conversation and go through the four whats that we talked about yesterday, and I actually have the conversation, a lot of times they were unaware that they had done something, and they were extremely apologetic for that, and grateful and appreciative that I brought it to their attention that they did something that they were unaware of. And we've talked in the past here about being accidental diminishers, this idea of doing things that we do on accident that may diminish someone. The same thing happens with this relationally, is that we can say or do things certain times that we don't have a clue what we're doing that could affect someone else. So don't assume that the other person knows they did something, and you'll find that out as you engage in the conversation. So do those two things. Don't assume that they know that they did something that would require a tough conversation. And two is don't wait. Don't wait to have the hard conversation, because it will only get harder. And so the go and do today is to do those things, apply those things. It may mean for you that there's someone on your team you need to have a tough conversation with. If that's the case, go through the four whats that we gave you to prepare yourself for it, and then engage in the conversation. You will be better as a result. Your team will be better. The collaboration that you have, the health of your team will be better as a result, and you'll be on your way to having an extraordinary team. So apply those two things today to any tough conversation that you have.